architecture. We're definitely close, though. I get the feeling the natives here had a thing for snakes. Always with the snakes.
Thank you once again, Real Life Indiana Jones, for some more fantastic acting. Really appreciated that great introduction. Welcome back to the expedition, everybody. Where we left off in episode 1 of The Forbidden Eye, things were just starting to get interesting. Having green-lit Indiana Jones and the Temple of the Forbidden Eye, aka the Indiana Jones Adventure, Tony Baxter and his team of 400 Imagineers set to work to bring this ride to life with a estimated budget of over $100 million, which is a ton of money, but admittedly less than Indiana Jones and the Lost Expedition would have cost. Ground broke on the construction of the ride in August of 1993 and was completed just a year and a half later in March of 1995. Pretty impressive turnover time with no unexpected delays. The first issue to consider when constructing the ride was where in the world to put it. Adventureland is a little bitty area in the park, so squeezing such a major expansion into it was no easy feat. What they ended up doing is placing the ride outside of the previous confines of the park, which was a genius solution, but now the problem was getting the guest from Adventureland all the way off into the show building, which required a little bit of extra legwork. Here is where the ride is located on an overhead map, thank you Google, right next door to the showroom for Pirates of the Caribbean. The queue squeezes its way down this long and narrow path to reach the 50,000 square foot showroom that is just outside of Adventureland. To make room for the massive new building and the long queue that reaches to it, 5 big things had to happen. First, the Jungle Cruise had to be rerouted to make room for the queue. The river was compressed in a little bit, creating a new space for the outdoor queue and the temple facade that you can see from on board the Jungle Cruise. Second, an extended side queue for Pirates of the Caribbean was demolished to make way for the queue space where it is now. Third, a tunnel needed to be built as part of the queue itself to allow guests to walk under the Disneyland Railroad tracks, as the show building is on the far side of the tracks. I believe you go under the railroad tracks right when you're in the Bat Caves in the queue. You're actually going underneath the Disneyland Railroad. Fourth, the Eeyore parking lot, which was one of the lots that used to be directly outside of Disneyland, those days are long gone, was demolished so that the ride could be built directly on top of what used to be a parking lot. And fifth and finally, the monorail track was also rerouted. It used to travel on the inside of the Eeyore parking lot nearest to the park, but it had to get bumped forward to make room for the show building, and it now passes around the edge of the show building, although from on board the monorail, all you really see is kind of a white wall behind a wall of trees. So it's so camouflaged, you never know what's in there. Even with all of that extra work to make space for the giant showroom and the queue, another problem presented itself. In order to get guests from the streets of Adventureland to the boarding area in the showroom, guests would have to walk half a mile through the queue. Yes, you heard me correctly. Every time you ride Indiana Jones, you walk a solid mile, half a mile down through the queue to where you board the ride vehicles, and once you unload, half a mile back to Adventureland proper. So you get your steps in for sure. Rather than being a drag, however, Imagineers went all out to make the queue super immersive and exciting. In my opinion, it is the single greatest queue Disney has ever made to this day. Yes, that's factoring in the new stuff, though granted I haven't been on Rise of the Resistance or Flight of Passage yet, but still, the Indiana Jones queue is absolutely amazing. I don't mind walking half a mile. I don't mind standing in line because I can just ogle at the surroundings and take in this amazing work of Imagineering. One of the first things developed for the ride was the technology for the ride vehicles. And it was actually the ride vehicles that impressed and excited former Disney CEO Michael Eisner enough to green-light this project, even though the Disney parks were having a struggle financially at the time. But they had the rights to make an Indiana Jones ride, and they had the technology for the vehicles, and they could not waste that opportunity, so Michael Eisner gave it the thumbs up. So what then makes these vehicles so special? Let me introduce you to the Enhanced Motion Vehicle Ride System. It's been hanging on my wall so I can study it for you. Do you understand it now? You got all of it? Because, let me explain a little better. If I can get this back on my wall, it was not worth it. It's crooked now. Guys. The enhanced motion vehicle thing. The ride vehicles for the Indiana Jones adventure are no ordinary ride vehicles. Imagine taking your typical dark ride vehicle, just goes on a flat track through scenes, and then imagine taking the Star Tours motion simulator, that is this big cab on hydraulics, ripping off the roof of the motion simulator and duct taping it to the normal ride vehicle so it can simulate movement while you're riding on a relatively flat track. There you have the enhanced motion vehicle ride system. It's essentially what the vehicles are, and it was an ingenious progression of the technology that was so successful for Star Tours just a few years prior. The vehicle is designed to look like a big old Jeep-style expedition car that can sit 12 riders across 3 rows. During the Indiana Jones Adventure ride, however, the vehicle is actually moving on a smooth and mostly flat track, but thanks to the hydraulic platform that sits on top of the base with the wheels, the ride feels like you are bumping around some rough and rugged terrain. But you're really just kind of going on a nice flat surface. This technology was developed in a warehouse near Disney's Burbank Animation Studios, and all of the Imagineers were immediately thrilled and excited with its potential. Not only do the hydraulics provide a thrilling and bumpy experience that feels out of control and realistic, but they also provide a degree of randomization. Each ride can feel different than the last because each of the 17 ride vehicles has been programmed with its own unique personality. So one vehicle might take certain turns harder than others, or stop faster, or when it stalls, it might lurch into motion a little bit differently. They each behave a bit different, and they each have a bunch of different programmed movements that they can randomly cycle through to make your experience a little bit different every time you ride the ride. Even though the ride vehicles can only go a max of 14 miles an hour, the enhanced motion technology provides an amazing experience that is unlike anything you've ever experienced, I assure you.
It is unlike anything you have ever experienced, I assure you.
On top of the enhanced motion, the ride vehicles are also equipped with rolling tires, headlights, and onboard audio system, just to add even more to the immersion of the ride. Not to mention, sitting in the driver's seat is always a special treat. That steering wheel doesn't actually move at all, but no matter how old I get, it is fun to pretend like I am driving through the Temple of the Forbidden Eye. It adds, I promise it does add. Plus everyone else in the vehicle gets to yell at the driver like, hey, hit the gas, bozo, come on, there's a snake over there. And the thing's shooting lasers at us. Can we drive, please? All in all, these ride vehicles are ingenious, and in my opinion, are one of the biggest factors to why the ride is as good as it is. The only problem is that the hydraulics are prone to leakage, which is one of the biggest reasons that the ride has notoriously frequent and long downtimes as they replace the hydraulic fluid and clean up the oil spills and whatnot. It's a whole thing, but it's still awesome, let's be honest. In constructing the temple, immersion and authenticity were the 2 biggest goals for the Imagineers. From the moment you enter Adventureland, it is a steady buildup all the way into the queue, through the queue up to the ride vehicle where your mind is getting immersed and in the zone for this ride so that you are already 100% in the Indiana Jones world by the time you buckle your seatbelt. The Imagineers took influence from ancient temples in India and Cambodia to construct the sets, but they took special care to age everything. And I imagine it was rather tricky to make something brand new, just constructed, appear to be ancient and falling apart. Not only did the Imagineers make things look old, but they took special care to study the effects of heat and humidity and how they would impact ancient ruins in the tropical regions of India that the ride takes place. All in all, the biggest goal in constructing the ride was to make it believable, going off an old principle from Walt Disney that nobody would believe the magic if it wasn't happening in a believable setting. In other words, all of the amazing, wondrous special effects in the Indiana Jones adventure wouldn't really be very amazing or wondrous if the setting around them wasn't equally amazing. There were also negotiations in 1994 to get Harrison Ford to reprise his role as Indiana Jones for the ride, but for decidedly unknown reasons, those negotiations broke down and it just never happened. Disney still reconstructed Harrison Ford's physical likeness for the audio animatronics. I don't know how Harrison Ford feels about that. And a man by the name of Dave Temple, which is just way too perfect of a last name. I don't know if that's his real name or if he got a name change, but Dave Temple voices Indiana Jones on the ride itself. But the ride was being constructed and was in very, very good hands. It was all set and ready to open on March 4th of 1995. But meanwhile, while construction was wrapping up, Disney was launching the biggest advertising campaign ever for an amusement park ride at the time. $20 million spent to advertise this thing, and this advertising campaign is something else. On the topic of the advertising campaign, Michael Eisner claimed that nobody west of the Mississippi River would escape the marketing blitz. And then Disneyland's marketing vice president at the time, Michelle Reese, went as far as to say that no one in the whole world would go without knowing about this ride. Regardless of the truth, the advertising campaign for the Indiana Jones adventure was pretty bonkers, so let's get into exactly what they did.
Now dare to cross forbidden boundaries to the ultimate adventure.
Parts of the advertising blitz included, of course, lots of TV commercials, a couple TV specials that aired on the Disney Channel, as well as several other networks. In addition, displays advertising the ride were put up in the windows of nearly 350 Disney stores, and they sold special merchandise in the stores like replicas of Indy's hat and things like that. Now, here's where things start to get a little crazy. On top of all of that, there was a traveling mini Indiana Jones live-action stunt show that had pop-up locations in various Disney stores across the country, where they would actually have, I guess, Indy punching people. I couldn't find any videos of this, but live-action stunt shows to promote the ride in malls across the country. And the grand finale, the icing on the cake, the cherry on top of the advertising blitz, was the Indiana Jones Adventure themed Super Bowl halftime show in 1995. It aired during the 1995 Super Bowl on March 7th, just a few days after the ride's opening. And let me tell you, this thing was something else. This thing was wild. I just watched it, the whole thing recently, all 11 minutes of it, and it's really something special. The commercial break right before the halftime show ends with, of course, a commercial for the brand new Indiana Jones Adventure, and then cuts immediately to the 11-minute madhouse that was the Super Bowl 1995 halftime show. It starts with this cult leader guy asking for the Super Bowl trophy to be brought to him, but the best thing is he immediately goes out of character after he's finished delivering his line. And then we see all of these wild costumes of dudes dressed like snakes and people on giant stilts. And there's just so many people in all of these elaborate costumes. It's absolute madness. And then a giant recreation of Mara with one of his eyes just blown up rises up out of the ground. And then suddenly Patti LaBelle is on stage and she's belting out a very out of place musical performance. She does kill it though. Her costume's pretty styling as well, so she gets a pass from me. And then after some pyrotechnics that draw everyone's eyes up to the sky, Indiana Jones and Marion Ravenwood, his girly friend, come parachuting out of the sky with lit fireworks, like flares attached to their feet. There are hundreds and thousands of ways this could have gone wrong. Like, holy moly, this was dangerous to do on live TV with, millions of viewers, but they drop in right on cue. And while they're coming, all like 100 billion dancers on the ground start frantically running around in these ridiculous circles. And then when they land, Indiana and Marion just start beating people up to get the Super Bowl trophy. It's absolutely wild. They set a guy literally on fire. They just light a guy on fire and kick him off an edge. There's this Doritos ad on the ground in the field. And then Tony Bennett comes out and he gives a very sad sounding performance about how exciting this is, I guess. And then they all start playing catch with the Super Bowl trophy. And then Mara, this really confuses me. Mara starts demanding that Indy and Marion look into his eyes.
Look into my eyes!
What? Mara, isn't the whole deal that you don't want people to look into your eyes? Also, why are you saying eyes plural? When your eyes is gone, dude, you gotta get that fixed. And to top it all off, at the grand finale, Patti LaBelle comes back to perform Can you guess what song Patti LaBelle comes back to perform at the 95 Indiana Jones Super Bowl spectacular performance halftime show? Of course, Can You Feel the Love Tonight? Out of all the songs in the world, they decide that the Lion King's Can You Feel the Love Tonight is the logical conclusion to Indy beating a bunch of people up. It's absolute insanity. It's honestly, all things considered, a pretty awful halftime show, but words cannot describe how much I love this thing. And I'm assuming a big chunk of that $20 million advertising campaign directly went to this crazy Super Bowl performance. But you know what? Money well spent, Disney. Money well spent. Can we focus? Money well spent. Money. Okay, we're not focusing. Money well spent, Disney. Money well spent. It's also worth noting that AT&T sponsored the Indiana Jones Adventure ride from 1995 up through 2002, which helped get the project off the ground in the first place, but the ride does not currently have a sponsor. So we got the Imagineering, the construction, the advertising campaign, big check for the ridiculous Super Bowl halftime show. And then on March 3rd of 1995, we have the ride's grand opening ceremony. Like I said, March 3rd, it actually happened a couple days prior to that Super Bowl halftime show. There was an opening ceremony, a private event with a little live action stunt show, a little speech from my man George Lucas, and then there was a bunch of celebrities that got to preview the ride. Dan Aykroyd, Arnold Schwarzenegger, Brendan Fraser, Dennis Miller, and just a bunch of other celebrities of the time. And they seemed to enjoy the ride, some more than others. Some seemed like they would rather not have the camera in their face and just go, I don't know, home. I really can't tell with some of these guys. So my main new goal in life is to get just popular enough for Disney to invite me to a ride preview so I can ride it and then have a camera in my face and I go, it was pretty cool, and then leave. It might be a little too late for the Spider-Man ride, but Minnie and Mickey's Runaway Railway, Disney, you know where to find me. Just, send me an email, drop me a comment, call me up, and I'll be there to ride your ride. On the house, right? Come on, Disney. Thanks. So just like that, the ride was opened right on schedule. Amazingly, no delays, no errors. The Imagineers just built this thing in a year and a half. And then the best piece of Imagineering ever built was there and open for the world to enjoy. And with that, we can get into our next topic, get into the thick of it, bite our teeth into the immersion of the ride, and talk about the finalized story for the Indiana Jones Adventure ride. Most of the story is very accessible, and someone who's never been on the ride before should be able to learn the bulk of it if they're paying even just a little bit of attention. The general story is told through immersion, a lot of the set design and the queue itself giving a lot of context to the rider of what the heck is going on here. A more concrete version of the story is given in the theater room of the queue, where videos give safety information, Sala gives his little spiel that we all know and love, and more story context is given throughout 3 different newsreels. And finally, the ride itself, of course, tells you what's going on. You could just use your eyes and see what's going on through the sets, but also your ears through the voices of Sala, Mara, and Indiana Jones himself. However, there is an even deeper and more detailed aspect to the canonical story of this ride that is told through 12 letters and telegrams that are scattered throughout the queue. The bulk of them are hanging up in Indy's office, and if you can ask a cast member to just step aside so you can get your binoculars and try to read some of these things, you can see some letters that are exchanges between Indiana Jones, Sala, Indy's mentor Abner Ravenwood, as well as some other museum curators and government officials and people of that nature. There's 12 of these things all throughout the queue that add even more to the story of the ride. Even more of the story, a lot of the story can be found thanks to Indy's notes on this map here, which the C from our Disneylander Discord helped me to digitally enhance and make it a little bit more readable, linked to his channel below, but I've been unable to find a source version in which all of the notes are visible. But oh well, this map is still delightful to read everything that I can read on it, which is, granted, most of it. But that's enough of the stage setting here. Presented to you now is the full story of events. What is really going on in the Indiana Jones adventure? The year is 1935, and archaeologist/adventure man Dr. Indiana Jones has reunited separate pieces of a map that details the location of a 2,000-year-old temple in the Lost River Delta of India. And I am going to stop doing that voice now, but Indy's close friend Sala found, supposedly, according to one of these telegrams, the final piece of the map thanks to his supposed brother-in-law who deals in the black market or something like that. Long story short, Indy reunited the pieces of a map that located exactly where the Temple of the Forbidden Eye was in the Lost River Delta of India. With the map in hand, Jones and his expedition find the temple, but it is largely buried in silt when they find it due to an ancient flood. So the excavation process is notably time-consuming and expensive to bury these artifacts out of the temple. Thankfully, most of the temple is built in chambers underground, so while the top was largely washed away and buried by silt, which is why the temple you see is so tiny, a lot of it is still preserved underground. And even with all the silt, the excavation is going well, and exchanges with various museum curators and linguists help to translate the language found throughout the temple, the alphabet known as maraglyphs, which is really just English if you squint and think a little bit, but Indy needed a linguist, so don't blame him too hard. It is thus that Indy learns of a powerful deity named Mara, who is known to bestow one of 3 gifts to those worshippers of his that do not look into his eyes. For those that do look into Mara's eyes, however, the promise is death. Before reaching Mara, archaeologists are confronted with dozens of booby traps that they have politely disarmed, kind of, sort of, almost for us, and swarms of snakes and rats and crocodiles are just a few of the many dangers within the preliminary corridors of the temple. Eventually, however, Indy does reach the Chamber of Destiny, where Indy believes the idol Mara looks into the minds of his worshippers to discover their secret desires, so that he can give them just the best Christmas present they ever did receive. It's worth noting that this ride takes place shortly before Raiders of the Lost Ark, the first Indiana Jones movie, and Indy notes on the map here that while he's in the Observatory of the Future, another thing to note on this map, when you get the Observatory of the Future route and you're approaching Mara, you're not in the Observatory of the Future. You're in the Hall of Promise of the Future. Indy actually got into the Observatory of the Future because he didn't look into Mara's eyes. And while he was there, he was granted with a vision of the future in which he saw himself and Sala discovering the Ark of the Covenant in an Egyptian tomb. Spoiler alert. That's what happens in the first movie. Mara's gifts are pretty cool. Around this point, 3 important things happen in the story. One of Indy's telegrams notes that reports about the fantastical Temple of the Forbidden Eye hit the media, and newsreels are disseminated around the world. The whole world is fascinated, has eyes on this temple that Indiana Jones has found. The second thing that happens is that the archaeological expedition runs out of funding money. The work has to come to a halt because they, despite this thing being so amazing and incredible, have no more money to keep digging silt out of the ground. And 3, Indy learns of a supposed jewel of power that he theorizes is the power source behind the temple. Pretty much nothing is ever mentioned about this jewel of power. It's very confusing. It's mentioned in a couple of the little 12 telegrams and notes that I keep referring to in Indy's office, but apart from that, there's really nothing. But then I found this old fan website, and it boldly claims that, and I quote, "The jewel of power is a tiny slice of dark star brought forth from the heavens by the omniscient Mara." And so that really did intrigue me. I thought, wow, that's some big news. Aliens are getting involved, I guess? Indiana Jones 4, so I naturally clicked through on that link to learn more and was led to a page titled Astronomy Interests. And then there's some links to NASA pages that no longer exist and stuff like that. So I get the feeling that they might have made that part up. And while this website is a great wealth of information for a lot of, I mean, look how old this website is. It's really fantastic. There's some good stuff here. But the Jewel of Power doesn't really matter at all. We can just kind of forget about it. Honestly, it seems like something that the Imagineers started working on and then said, guests don't care about it and no Jewel of Power. And they just kind of left it in some notes. Moving on. Anyway, so the expedition is out of money, But then Sala comes up with this great idea to start offering tours. People can come and buy tours of the parts of the temple that have already been excavated, and using that tourist money, big tourist destination, they can fund the rest of the excavation. And that, my friends, is almost where you come in. That's starting to set the stage for our appearance on the ride. The temple is, of course, extremely dangerous and full of somewhat active booby traps, and a few tourists even go missing, but people are receiving gifts of wealth and youth and visions of the future from Mara, so of course the Temple of the Forbidden Eye becomes the hot spot for tourism. Now, if you are a particularly observant viewer, you might be wondering, why didn't anyone in the excavation expedition simply go to the Chamber of Earthly Riches and get a bunch of gold from Mara instead of inviting tourists to this very dangerous temple? And the answer to that question is that there might not be one. That's what they call a plot hole, baby. If there is an answer for the reason why they didn't just get wealth from Mara to fund the expedition, it's written in this one little section of the map that is too blurry for me to read. So really though, if you can find a picture of this map, if you can see this map in person and take a picture of the upper left corner for me in high enough definition for me to read, just send it my way and I will be your best friend for all time, because why didn't they just take Mara's money? He was offering it. He said, I want to give you money. Come on. Indy even mapped that room, so he's been in there, let's be honest. And speaking of plot holes, how did Indy get this perfect depiction of the idol of Mara? I think he's been cheating a little bit. Come on, guys. Anyways, again, enough of that. With this newfound stream of revenue from tourists, Indy is able to go back in the temple and go deeper than ever before. He believes he's figured out where this supposed jewel of power might be, so he goes deeper into the temple. Sala wants to accompany him on this newer, deeper expedition to find the jewel of power, but Indy says, no, you hold up here and watch the tourists, Sala. I mean, come on, Indy. Sala was just trying to help you. And of course, Indy goes missing when he goes deeper into the temple. There's another little plot hole here. The little videos that play in the queue claim that Indy went into the temple searching for lost tourists and then he went missing, where the notes and telegrams claim that Indy went into the temple searching for the jewel of power when he went missing. I guess they could both be true. I'm gonna go with the Jewel of Power just because, let's be honest, those tourists are probably dead by now. They didn't really stand a chance without Indy in there. So Indy goes in and gets lost looking for his delightful jewel. Anyway, Sala decides to just go ahead and keep the tourists running even while Indy is lost in the temple. His hope is that maybe one of the tour expeditions will happen to stumble across Indiana Jones or something like that. But that, my friends, is right where you do come in as a rider. You, as a rider, foolishly look into Mara's eyes, because of course you do, and then instead of receiving the gift that you could have obtained had you just closed your eyes, you are whisked away deeper into the temple. Now, Mara here tries to open the gates of doom. Opening the gates of doom would spell doom for you, but thankfully your handy pal Indiana Jones is standing with his back to the door, holding the gates of doom shut, saving your life. So instead of going into or around or whatever happens when the gates of doom open, you just go deeper into the temple to where things get very extra super dangerous, and Mara's like, hold up, I tried to kill you and you're not dead, so I'm gonna keep trying to kill you. And so Mara shoots a lot of laser beams at you. There's some zombies, there's a giant snake, and there's a giant boulder. And of course, all the fun adventure that happens in the temple was entirely avoidable, but it is still better than the Gates of Doom being the alternative. So you gotta thank Indiana Jones for saving your life. You repay him at the end. I guess not, actually. Come to think of it, he says, hey, let me in your truck, I'm gonna die, there's a boulder, and you just kind of peace out, and Indy's okay down below. So anyways, so there you have it. Wow, this video is probably very long, but I hope you have learned something. That is the full in-depth story of the Indiana Jones adventure. But that's where we're gonna stop for today. Next week, on episode 3 of The Forbidden Eye, I'm going to be your skipper, or I guess at the very least, just your normal tour guide as we take a guided tour through the Temple of the Forbidden Eye, taking a look at all of its delights and all of its history as we do so. Special things like that. It's going to be a lot of fun. So I'll see you next week. Remember to bring your blindfold so that we can maybe actually see one of the chambers behind Mara's head. But until then, I really do hope you enjoyed this video. This project has been a passion project. If you enjoyed it, if you had fun, if you learned something new, please do me a favor, drop a like. Ring that bell, gamers, if you want to be updated, that is, when the next episode gets uploaded. And of course, always the most important thing to me, share the video with a friend. Drop it in a Twitter, share it to a Disney fan that you know, whoever you might think will find it interesting. Helps me out a lot, helps me create more of this style of content, but I'm gonna shut up now because I've been told I talk way too much at the end of my videos. So bye, see you next week on episode 3 of The Forbidden Eye. Another special thanks, shout out thing to end here. Again, thank you to Josh Bell for the bootleg Indiana Jones theme that played in the intro and right now. Again, thank you, The Sea, for the digital image enhancing. Thank you, Adela, for the live action map prop. And Aurora is my favorite person. Anyways, see you guys next week.